stuff together. So the show is yours, Jack.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. Today is the information governance and eDiscovery interest group. I'm Jack Thompson. I am the co-chair of the group for ACC. Gary Logan, who is the other co-chair, unfortunately is not able to make it today, so I'm going to go solo and just lead the discussion. Today's discussion is mainly a roundtable, more or less, and focusing in on our topic du jour, which is a Microsoft deep dive on the challenges with governance, where we can list and discuss the current and future challenges related to InfoGov with M365 and the Teams platform. If you're in a position like I am at Sanofi, where you're controlling everything to do with information management and information governance for the legal department, Microsoft and Teams are either your worst enemy or best friend. And I apologize, I'm in a waiting room right now, so my mask has to stay on. So I apologize if you can't see my snarls. Anyway, I wanted to just really kind of give the framework to say that this is really just an overall discussion and kind of hear from everyone in the various industries that you're in, your legal departments, of how you're currently or futuristically thinking about dealing with your information governance policies, or what are some of your deep challenges that you're seeing now or could see within the M365 and Teams platform. I know a number of us are on the litigation side, or some of us are on the information governance side, some of us are both. So I'm very interested to hear where some of you are. I'm also very happy to share some of my experiences that I'm encountering right now here at Sanofi. And yeah, that's going to be the crux of the conversation. And obviously we're leading towards moving the conversation of InfoGov and eDiscovery with Office 365 for corporate legal departments to a much more strategic approach in terms of developing a maturity model and really concentrating on how best to utilize our experience information and really translate it into that maturity model to say, how can we help each other in dealing not only with our current situations and unique things, but also how can we go back to Microsoft to say, as a collective client base, this is what your industry clients are seeing. How can you help us? I think there's been a lot of talk and a lot of encouragement from various different groups out there that anyone that's in a legal department that has to deal with the e-discovery aspect or just the general governance of information for preservation or record keeping purposes within Office 365, and especially with Teams now being the most useful collaborative platform that a lot of us are using, unless you're on the Google suite, in which case you got your own issues right there. But nevertheless, how can we communicate better and really open up lines of communication in terms of the challenges? So that being said, I'm going to lead off with one really quick challenge topic that I'm seeing and start the conversation there. First and foremost, we're realizing that legal holds are not as easy as everyone says they are in the Office 365 platform. And this presents a challenge from the e-discovery side as well as the preservation side, namely that we have built our processes on ensuring that a litigation hold tag is entrusted whenever a legal hold goes out onto a particular user's mailbox or OneDrive. However, the Microsoft platform of Security and Compliance Center and the legal hold management program that incurs there only does in-place holds, which is contrary to what the literature that Microsoft is presenting. So there's been a lot of, I don't know how to say, difficult communications in terms of what Microsoft is saying, what is actually practical, and how our processes were built in the first place. So the adaptability has been very difficult to work with. How can we adjust our technical processes as well as our defensibility? And overall, how are we now forced to work and change and work with IT to really just adjust everything to ensure that our InfoGov policies are in place? And also, how can we, defensively either manage, delete, or instigate any type of legal hold management through the security and compliance system when our technicalities are off? So that's my biggest challenge right now. I've been working on this project for I don't know, I guess since March of this year, because we just went live with in 2020 with Office 365, and it's just presenting one problem after another. So it's been kind of a unique challenge. And I'm going to open it up to the floor to see if anyone else is having the same challenges, or if you'd like to move on to something else. Or I could do what David Cowan does and just call on people and then just basically say, hey, how are you doing it? So I'll give the floor open to anyone that would like to speak before I call on anyone.
Hey, Jack, a lot of folks just joined the call in the last 2 minutes.
Okay.
As well, just a heads up.
Okay. Understood. If you're not comfortable speaking out loud, please feel free to use the chat.
This is Shirley Tian. I'm from Beijing. I can give a little bit background of how we are dealing with it. And as you mentioned, we do see a lot of the same issues that you're dealing with. So we recently went with a vendor relativity. And I think that's like the golden standard in the EDRM process or eDiscovery industry. So we recently contracted with them, and we're in the process of implementing the legal hold system to start with. So hopefully that will make all these challenges easier for us.
Yeah, it's very interesting you say that, Shirley. We've implemented Legal Hold Pro from Zapproved into our network, and we're trying to utilize the Cloud Preserve tool with our Office 365 environment. And we're finding that while it works, the integration works, we're just finding that the overall mechanics of how Microsoft's platform doesn't work the way we're so used to seeing it. So, but that is one avenue to say, yes, this works. However, it's just now we have to relearn our processes. So congratulations on the relativity. That's actually great news. But I can understand your point, and thank you for sharing. Lisa, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so we manage our actual legal hold notice issuance through Xtero, and then in Compliance Center, we're using advanced eDiscovery and Core to flag people as legal hold. But when we first tried to basically go from, we're just using this environment, and we want to put all the thousands and thousands of people we have on hold in Compliance Center, we broke it. And so then we had to wait almost 2 months for Microsoft to come up with a fix to we were basically mass tagging via the CSV file upload. And so they did come up with a fix, but then what we've realized is for our scale and our needs, we have to look at another alternative. So we are actually in the selection process for a vendor that basically can help us manage our data that's in the 365 environment and allow us to manage legal holds, data collection, data minimization, because and I kind of get it. Like, I don't think this is the business Microsoft really wanted to be in, and I don't see them committing resources. I think I almost got turned in I think it was last week or the week before, I literally got in a fight with them on the phone because I was getting mansplained to and basically told, well, if you don't have such and such license, why are you expecting us to do X? And I'm telling the guy, look, you've got dozens and dozens of customers telling you the exact same thing I'm telling you. What will it take you to respond? And I just don't ever get an adequate answer to that.
Same. I got the open a ticket. I'm like, okay, I've opened 6 tickets and I'm getting the same answer, get another ticket. I don't know, is it like a lottery? We have to get 6 numbers to, to essentially, get progress. And actually I've spoken, at least I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. I've spoken to people at Microsoft that are not in the service line, and it just seems to be, I agree with you. And just not understanding the scale of the largeness of some companies are very large. Your company's large, my company's very large, and global. So there's a difficulty in translation in terms of actual volume to really understand what we're trying to do, but we're being forced to make these rules. So I have until the end of this year to really make progress. And thank you for the heads up on the challenges in terms of too many people, because we have thousands of people under legal hold. I'm just scared to see what's going to actually happen when we do that migration, and it's going to probably bust the system.
Well, and the other thing they'll say to you is, oh yeah, you can do that, but you have to use PowerShell.
Yeah.
But when I asked, okay, great, but why should 10 different companies write the same PowerShell to do the same activity? Can you not just make a PowerShell library available to your customers, especially at least your E5 level? Although I've heard now they're going to get rid of the E3 level, so you'll only be able to do an E5. And so in my mind, it's ridiculous with the amount of money we're probably all paying that we can't even just get a PowerShell library available to our customers of common scripts that we all would probably have to write on our own.
Yeah. Stepping away from, I think, the technical pieces here, and I apologize if I think Lisa and I have been in the same role for a very long time. We get the technicalities of it. Has anyone ever been on the challenge side in your legal department to have a defensible position where they've had to take in terms of operationalizing their preservation practices, but running into the consistent challenge of either the technology not working the right way or not being able to explain it? Or has anyone had any encounters with Microsoft where, you know, they have basically come back and said, no, we can't do this, but try this, and then you're working with your IT teams to try to figure it out, or have had to go in front of a court or provide for your litigation support attorneys or your records managers, for that matter, any explanations? If not, I mean, it's kind of it's a hard question, because we're all kind of we're in the cone of silence and cone of trust. Nothing said here will violate any type of privilege or confidentiality. It's just common practice from a perspective. If you're working within operations, they consistently run into these types of issues. Or I should say, if you're not doing any type of preservation, which I question judgment there if you're not, but if your role is more or less working with, let's say, other types of information where information governance is relevant, but you do have to add some level of, let's say, classification of information in terms of here's a sensitive document versus an internal document, but you're really relying upon Microsoft to help with those classifications, or if there's a need to preserve something for a very long time, do you have any issues designing workflows around that actual getting that preservation done?
Hey, this is Preston Schmidt from Regions Bank. We've had some interesting conversations internally about sensitivity classification, going back and forth with our internal IT teams as far as, I mean, I hate to break it down to this, but the nomenclature that they're using for the sensitivity labelings of what they're applying on specific docs. You know, we've been going back and forth with them. They're saying, you know, this is the ISO standard. I hear you, but when something's marked as internal use only, that looks really odd when a customer is receiving that or something like that. So yeah, we've been having that kind of sensitivity classification. We are just starting to broach the topic of record classification. We actually had a call with Microsoft and our internal teams earlier in the week to kind of start laying the groundwork for how we're going to approach that.
Great. Preston, are you, as you're in those conversations, are you gearing them more towards just the general environment, or are you getting in more of a specific area, such as using Teams or setting up the nomenclature for Teams per se, or just general platform, regular documents, OneDrive?
Yeah, right now it's specifically just regular documents. That has been our biggest piece. Security has gotten AI PP2, the sensitivity classification, and it's a shiny new toy that of course they want to use and immediately turn on. And it's one of those they're trying to get it rolled out. We're trying to make sure that legal has blessed it and everybody's comfortable with it before it happens. But
yeah, understood. It's always tricky, especially with those. I see that. I think you're in a very similar position to me in terms of, we're going through that exact same conversation. However, now I'm already moved on to Teams with that conversation to say how best can we put our setup for Teams versus just the document itself. Because I think that while it's very helpful to have that type of capability, and also it's a little bit trickier when you have like just one group in your organization that's managing this flow, or an external consultant that really isn't concerned with all of the nuances of the rest of the organization. I'll be the first one to say that legal was the last folks that were consulted. But now I've already moved into Teams to say, okay, well, how can we apply these types of measures for team sites that are literally created on the fly and may need to be potentially preserved or cataloged as an appropriate station. So any other thoughts on that particular show? That's a really great topic. But as it relates to Microsoft or in general, just your general data platform.
Yeah, this is Nate Johnson
Hey,
from
Nate.
the Well Company. Hey, Jack, good to see you again.
Yep.
I'm sort of in the same challenge right now. We're a pretty small legal department and relatively, I guess, the topic of eDiscovery is relatively new to the company. We're a construction general contractor. So you say technology in the construction industry, you can assume we're already 10 years behind. Although we're trying to get better, but the challenge that I have, Jack, you kind of alluded to this and others, is there's a whole bunch of new technology coming online that everybody wants to use, but nobody is really thinking about it through the lens of, how do we adopt this into our data governance program in a way that makes sense. And at the same time, we have a whole bunch of legacy systems that create challenges for us in some of the current, discovery and litigation issues that we have. And so, there's really not a great way to solve those problems from a comprehensive stance. It's really sort of saying, okay, we have to bifurcate, what are we going to do in the, largely O365 cloud type environments for where our operations are going versus what do we do with some of the legacy data that we have to maintain. And we maintain a pretty substantial amount of legacy data because of some of the work that we do. And I think our IT folks are better about starting to think through some of that and have conversations with Microsoft, but we're kind of not invited to the dance until we sort of raise our hand, and because we find out about it after the fact, or we run into an issue where we've got to produce a whole bunch of information and nobody knows how to get it out of the system, and then all of a sudden we have a huge bill because we had to hire either outside consultants or outside counsel to maintain it. So we're trying to work with vendors a little bit more strategically as we're bringing on some of this technology to understand how that can fit into our program. But it's a challenge, and our legal team is 2 people, 2 lawyers, myself, and it's hard to keep this at the top of the priority list because it's not on fire until it's on fire, but it's important. So I've had success just having conversations with our IT folks when it comes up to be able to keep them in mind and say, hey, look, when you're evaluating this stuff, we need to talk because it is going to matter at some point when we have to figure out how to get that data out of the system or how we preserve it. So that's the best I've got on this issue.
Thanks, Nate. That's actually, I think we're all kind of in that same boat in some way, shape, or form. It just kind of the nature of the beast, really. But anyone from the records management side or the information management side, does anyone have any comments on that? I mean, I think from my perspective, I'm not in records management, but I know enough to be dangerous. So, but I'm very curious to see what other groups their records or document management folks are really doing to really kind of address these issues, or if they're getting any issues.
Jack, along those same lines, as part of the IG and RM, I guess, modules or blades or whatever Microsoft is calling them in the 365 environment, I would also be interested to see how records management pieces are owning that. If they're just owning the policy and saying, hey, these are the record codes that are applied to this, and then forcing IT to be the button pushers for establishing the file plan, the disposition notices that routes through 365. That's one of the discussions we're having internally is, all right, do we want to just own the paper piece of it and saying this is what the policy is, or do we want to be the ones actually in the compliance center hitting that button? So I'd be interested to see what everybody else is looking at too.
Yeah, no, that's actually really interesting. We're kind of in the same position too, where our records management group just really they're owning paper and not really owning digital. So it's just digital is kind of in this weird place because I don't know. We have a chief digital officer or data content person. I've never met them, and they're sitting in IT. So it bears wonder, like, how's this working? Because you're essentially a policy holder. Are you getting the right, excuse me, getting the right knowledge or the right challenges coming to your door, especially with data privacy, data content, data preservation, long-term retention, retention value. That's something that's very, I think anyone, just to really quickly shift the conversation, Microsoft's retention rules are still a little bit tricky because who controls them, and then how long do you set them, and who has governance over them? Has anyone run into that particular issue where you're having trouble just getting those to work? I'll admit we had a retention issue with Exchange. Just setting the limits. We set one limit for something for legal hold, meaning do not delete, but it didn't work. Thankfully it wasn't a test run, but we didn't lose anything, but it was more or less like, well, if this is supposed to work for legal hold, how is it supposed to work for any other type of long-term retention or retention policy? Has anyone encountered any particular retention issues within the Microsoft environment? And again, love to hear from anyone that's got either the eDiscovery or InfoGov records management. Lisa, go ahead.
So we did run into a challenge with people in legal hold and Exchange. So we found out there were a bunch of secret thresholds and limits on things behind the scenes. So there's like an archive folder, and it was limited on how big it could get. So basically, and then if you've been flagged as legal hold and you do mass deletion. So we had a guy who he decided to clean up his email account for stuff that wasn't on legal hold, or so he thought. So he deleted a bunch of stuff. Well, then it turns out there's on the back end a threshold in terms of how much deleted content a legal hold person can have, because it has to do with how Exchange actually handles a legal hold person. Like, it goes into one kind of folder, I think it's called a recovery folder, and then there's another folder behind that for deleted content of legal hold people, but both of them have thresholds. And so this guy essentially exceeded the thresholds on those 2 secret folders he couldn't even see. And then that shut down his entire account so he could get no new mail. And so our IT administrators had to figure that one out because they weren't sure what was going on. And that's what we've generally found is when something breaks, we have to go search the internet, and then we find out, oh, well, you can't do this because only 3 people are allowed to do this simultaneously. Oh, and across those 3 people, you can only do 100 gigs at a time. So my advice is, look at the internet if you run into something that's not working the way you think it should.
Hey, Lisa, was that the second stage recycle bin? Yeah, okay, yeah. We ran into some of that on SharePoint, I think up until November. For the second stage recycle bin, Microsoft had it where that was not searchable using the either core or advanced eDiscovery module.
So it sounds to me that we're pretty smart people. We should all invest in some form of archive technology that's just basically, when you hit a legal hold, it just automatically dumps and replicates, and very much like backup servers, just here it goes, just let it go into here, and that can be your legal hold copy for all of time. It's worthwhile. I just want 5% on the return. But nevertheless, I think this is kind of very, very similar to what a lot of us are experiencing. And I also don't think that most of us that are dealing with this particular issue, it's on our job description to really become Microsoft experts, because that's what I feel like that's kind of what we're leading to. So we should just be more familiar with a product that continually surprises us with things. Thanks. I'm going to check that out myself. We haven't run into it yet because I refuse to migrate until every stone is uncovered. Thankfully, we're kind of in a good place there. Has anyone had to go or provide litigation support or 30b-6 support in this particular area, or has anyone in your legal department had to consult with a third-party consultant to be a 30b-6 in a particular preservation issue in front of a court? If so, I can make recommendations, because yes, we have, and it's becoming more and more of a kludgy effort, especially when you're the InfoGov person or eDiscovery person, where you don't know enough about it, so you go to a vendor, and the vendor can only do so much based upon what your understanding is, and it's a very unique game. And quite honestly, I don't think the judge knows too much either. And opposing is kind of just looking for loopholes, or your opponent. So has anyone been in that situation? Or anyone planning on suing Microsoft for not being good enough to disclose their own technology?
I think Lisa hit the nail on the head earlier, saying that Microsoft having a repository of scripts, because at some point, and this is one of the arguments I was making, and for some other routes to RGC and to my boss as well, is that at some point we're going to have to give depositions around the PowerShell pieces that we're creating to do separate pieces, because we're not going to be able to point to, hey, this is how Microsoft did it. We had to write this custom piece or this custom aspect to do this. At some point, we'll get someone that's savvy enough to then question, all right, well, let's look at what you did. What did you include or not include in your PowerShell script to address this?
Exactly. I think a lot of, I think some of our vendors that we're working with, and Shirley, you mentioned Relativity, I mentioned Zapproved. I've gone to Zapproved to really ask them to help me develop some of these scripts. As we're working with Microsoft, to simply say, can you develop a script for me? I don't know if anyone else has internal resources that are just not experts, but especially when it comes to integration with other systems, sometimes they're the ones that need to know. And most often they're not. I'm getting responses to say, well, Microsoft limits us by doing this. I'm like, okay, but can you still write a script? I'm not asking Microsoft anymore because, as you said, they don't have a playbook. And they don't have necessarily the same answer for everyone based upon their situation. So I've been kind of relying upon outside support for script development as well as process overhaul. So it's been pretty interesting, but it also tests the relationships of where your support vendors go through. I don't know if anyone else has that same type of experience. Lisa, when you work with Xtero, have you had to, ask them to write anything for you or consult, especially with an integration?
No, because we're not integrating. Like I
Oh.
decided I don't want to try to integrate at this point. And so like I'm really opting towards what you mentioned earlier of looking for a third party to actually take over. And when I've talked to some peers of my size, what they've done is they've picked a third party vendor to basically replicate their M365 environment. And then they do all their activity on that replicant. They don't do it in their production instance. So that's why I chose not to integrate it this time.
Gotcha. What any forward thoughts that you could share on who you're looking at, or no, or is that
I can't right now.
okay?
Yeah, I can't right
No,
now, but
understood. Understood.
yeah, maybe on the what people are using survey, there might be some references there.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, especially if it's just going to be constant issues or hidden files. By the way, I think I've looked at half of these websites on the support line, and it's really where when I have to forward them to IT, that's really bad, right? So, okay, all right. Any other issues that anyone has, or any further comments that anyone like to discuss? Open up. This is our time to really talk and share. So please feel free to speak up. I know I like to talk, but I'm also in a hospital waiting room, so I can't talk that much and start screaming. God damn Microsoft. And honestly, this is not really a nothing but a complaint session about Microsoft, but this is important to really kind of hash out as we are looking at these various different scenarios. While you may not have anything that's really impacting your life right now, it's entirely possible that you may run into this issue depending upon where your situation sits. So it's good to actually just share the information, and nothing is too small or too overlooked. Okay. Well, I'm gonna offer actually some advice to a few folks on who I've worked with to kind of help address some of these issues, at least from a consultancy perspective, at least to lead me down a certain path. I've worked with a couple eDiscovery providers to really look at how are we managing collections and legal hold and preservation, and then what gets collected and then pushed into processing. So it's been good to have that relationship, especially when they're coming across data pieces that are really difficult to figure out. Like it's just not a simple Exchange file. It's coming from Exchange, but it's one of those hidden files. So there's a lot of deduplication, and there's also a lot of stubbing that occurs. So it's difficult, especially when you have legacy information included from PST files. So I've worked with Concilio and Lighthouse and Haystack to kind of address some of these issues. Very good. And they've been very good about turning around in terms of analyzing the data and giving you a good interpretation. So therefore, when you do go for legal hold collection and processing, you can do everything yourself, or you could just do one piece yourself and then use other tools to do what you need to do and send it off. It is really good because it helps with your information governance strategy, especially around preservation at the end of the day, and can alert you to specific issues and problems that come up. So I would recommend that if you're going down the path where you're going to have eDiscovery and you're still kind of in that position where you're not sure how your data is really structured, or if it's stored all in Microsoft but you have legacy things, these are things that you can that you can ask your vendor to start looking for. So that's one piece of advice. I think collectively, Microsoft has been somewhat helpful, but somewhat unhelpful in terms of overall just understanding what they have and how to adjust your processes. I would recommend that if anyone has any issues, I mean, as Lisa and I can attest, we've opened tickets, but we've seen no actual return in terms of addressing our specific problem. And of course, there's always licensing issues. So my recommendation is actually to go to the Microsoft legal department and start complaining to them and say, what is the fix? Call EJ Bernstein, and he may not like it, but he's the sacrificial lamb. So it's always good to like connect with someone from Microsoft directly and really just convey what is the best way to deal with this, especially if you're an eDiscovery lawyer or you're working on eDiscovery, or if you're in the information governance suite and you need answers to questions, especially on the technology as well as the integrations. And then finally, as I said before, I worked with Approved a lot for our legal hold management, as well as, considering options with them. Companies like them, Relativities, Xtero, they are very good at the technology piece, as well as helping to help make a decision about integration, but also having them understand the Office 365 side. They can actually render advice on best practice, and they can tell you, yes, they can do it, no, they can't. And don't be afraid to ask questions to them, and especially say, we're not going to pay you for this. That's usually what I like to say. I'm like, no, I'm not going to pay you, but before I pay you, I'm going to ask this question. If you say, oh, well, we can build it, I'm like, no. But if you have that already done, that's great, because that means I can do it too. So it's really just asking the right question and relying upon their expertise to help you navigate certain waters. I think that that's really, really important, is to really kind of share who's who does what, and who are some really good in implementation as well as architecture specialists. I find that those that understand the legal industry a lot better are much more in tune versus your typical IT consultant group, who, although they may understand how Office 365 works, it may not necessarily be the way that the legal department needs it to work for eDiscovery and for information governance and practice, especially around making sure retention works, making sure legal hold works, and making sure you have a defensible strategy and plan at the end of the day. So with that, I'm going to leave it open to any other further comments. If not, we can probably adjourn for today. I apologize, I have to run back to a hospital room very shortly. So any other further comments or any other questions, thoughts of the day? Wow, this is the most enlightening thing I've heard today. Or I need to have cocktails the next time I talk to Jack because he's so depressing. Trust me, I'm going to start drinking at some point. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining today. The conversation was great. Special thanks to everyone that chimed in. I really do. Yeah, I think we do need a support group. I thought it was called EDI, but but at the same time, it was great to see everyone, and I hope to see you on the next call. And if there's any other questions or comments or ideas you have for other topics concerning this particular interest group, please feel free to contact myself or Gary Logan or the ACC Legal Ops Center for our topics and ideas. We're happy to hear them, happy to flesh them out, and bring them to the table. So thank you again.
Thank you, Jack. Bye.
Right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Chat.